Hey there, cats and kitties. I'm the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, we'll be discussing my thoughts on episode 6 of the anime series, Sakurada Reset. And, much as myself and some others have speculated, this was very much a setup episode once again, promising to be the first of a three-part sort of self-contained story, a smaller story, that is going to be the focus of these next 3 episodes, but it also still speaks to the grander design as well, with recurring themes such as the resetting ability and the McGuffin and things of that nature. The entire history of Sakurada. This was an interesting episode for the fact that we only get one reset and it comes at the very end of the episode, and yet there are so many different temporal equations in a sense to pay attention to. I've actually taken to writing them down, which I will reference now. We start the episode 4 years ago with a young Kei coming into Sakurada, seemingly being a runaway. He says he's going to come live with his grandfather or whatever it is. I don't recall off the top of my head what happened to his parents. I don't think they were in the picture, whether they died or whatever like that. And I think we've heard before that he was staying with his grandparents. His grandparents moved away, or that was a story he told. I don't really remember. But the point being, we start 4 years ago. Then, of course, we jump to present day, which is actually unfolding in August, we're told. Again, a little bit of timey-wimey trippiness, because if we go back to the most modern scene we've seen before this, it was the September sequence of the previous episode where Marase had just been welcomed into the class, and it was Sarah, I believe it was, that was going to be working and with her and guiding her and everything like that. So that was September. So all of these events are still before that because it's August. So it's like, okay. Then, of course, we get a couple of different time period drops in the dialogue, revelatory though they may be, and playing into the grander scheme of things. 2 years ago was when the myth of the MacGuffin was created. 2 years ago was also around the time Sumire died, and everything sort of began in the first couple of episodes of the series. So it's a question mark who invented this rumor, this myth of the MacGuffin, of this magical stone or whatever it is that can seemingly, give its wielder the control over the powers and the abilities of everyone within Sakurada and everything like that. And then we find out, of course, with the old man, Sasano, that, is basically interacting at the earliest portion of the episode with Kei. 38 years ago, he was one of the founding members of the Bureau to study and understand abilities and things of that sort. The, air quotes, witch, who calls him 4 years ago when he's coming to Sakurada. She apparently, it was kind of a reverse psychology where she was calling him to tell him to stay away, knowing that this would just prompt him and propel him to solidify his wanting to go to Sakurada and everything like that, and sort of because he was unhappy with the world around him, whatever. And then, subsequently 10 years later, which is 28 years ago, Sasano had a sort of more, governmental position for whatever, however many years. So I like, you losing your way at all? It was all over the place, timeline-wise. The idea that, okay, well, the Bureau, the abilities in Sakurada are still relatively recent. Not even half a century's worth of time since they burgeoned, and of course the witch seems to suggest that she was one of the sort of, formatic central figures to that, but not of her own accord necessarily, where Sasano was one of the founding members, whatever that means, of the Bureau, studying, understanding. Did they, sort of a la Alice Tuzaroku, did they clamp down on this witch persona, this elderly woman, all those many years ago, because she was the first who began to show signs of an ability that she could wield? Was she just one of several? Did this become a thing that started to burgeon in the grander scheme, or did they siphon her ability out somehow? Does her ability interaction with others, like if she has physical contact, she says she can read the futures of other people. is this somehow, propelling and prompting the abilities within people, and like, she just happened to communicate and be in physical contact with a small band of people who were at the foundation of Sakurada those many years ago, and as they would have families and live and grow, and people would come into the town and interact. Now, what I'm saying is it something internal to the human beings that exhibit these abilities, or is it just the place they live and there's some sort of natural reaction, whether something man-based chemical reaction, causing mutations in humanity, that it's just the area they live in? Or was this witch persona, was she at the centermost thing? Was she one of the first with the powers, and somehow they found a way to manipulate and use her ability to put abilities into others? Was it something that just happened naturally? Is a lot of what I'm wondering. And there was a lot of interesting stuff in this episode. Once again, we really rely heavily on some sort of ethical and philosophical dilemmas. I really loved the swamp man sort of situation that Kei is describing to Haruki at one point. The idea that this guy gets stuck in a swamp and he is, for all intents and purposes, going to die. He's struck by lightning, and at the exact moment his life is taken, but in the surrounding area, a being of the exact equivalent is born with all of his memories, his mindset, and all this kind of stuff. And, the big quandary, the dilemma therein being, well, is it still the same person? Now, this is something, being a Trekkie, myself, as well as an otaku, as well as an anime fan, there has always been that long-standing debate with the transporters in Star Trek. Just bear with me on this brief aside, where, the sort of quandary is, if a human being goes into a matter, dismantler mechanism along the lines of a transporter, and then they are reformatted and put back together again, is what went into the machine and what subsequently comes out on the other end, is it the same being? So it's kind of that same scenario. A being was going to be snuffed out, having been trapped in a swamp, was struck by lightning, rather, which did the job for him. But because of that natural environment, another form that still held to those beliefs, those memories, that persona, was born. So can you say it's someone different, or is it still the same person? I would say it's a little bit more broad than that. If the person still has all the memories and the soul and the essence and the feelings, the emotions and the awareness, then yes, it is still the same person, but in a slightly changed form. An evolved form, a sort of splintered off form, whatever you want to say. But if you were that person, I think the quandary gets that much more nth degree if you put yourself into the swamp man's persona, into his guise. Rather than looking at it from outside the box, if you were the being who walked into the swamp and was trapped, was struck by lightning, you didn't know you were struck by lightning, and then you woke up, and without knowing it, you're actually now a different being, but with all of the same internal mechanisms and emotions and thoughts and feelings and memories and all that kind of stuff. Like, would that not mean you're different? Or would that mean you still live on? Are you still the same being? Because to me, at face value, the reason why this is such a philosophical dilemma is because you walk in and you die. That's the sort of neon sign flashing in the moonlight. You die, you die, you die. You're dead. But then some essence of you lives on. So the quandary is, does the soul from the one being transfer into the other? Does the mind and the chemical reactions and the mechanism of the brain necessitate that the ethereal, that soul-like essence most of humanity believes is contained within this sort of frail human husk, does that transfer? So you die in a swamp, but you wake up anew. Is it you waking up, or is it someone else who is, for all intents and purposes, you, but it's also not you. That's where that whole dilemma comes from. So I really was excited by that discussion and that quandary. Not really sure what the hell it has to do with the grander design thus far, except to sound very poignant and intellectual and everything like that. I don't know if this will play in at all. Very similarly in this episode is the discussion between Haruki and the witch after Kei has met with the witch. Haruki, I gotta go back to the first episode when Samir proposed the idea at the end of the summer. We will ask ourselves the question anew. We will start the summer with this as sort of something to observe. And by the end of the summer, which one of us is an android? Which one of us is not quite normal? And of course, again, to use that analogy, the sort of neon sign blinking in the moonlight, Haruki. She seems very strange, and she doesn't quite seem human. The way she observes and the way she thinks, the way she's captivated by someone else's thinking. She seems very reserved, very internalized, very cut off from the sort of, air quotes, normalcy of the world around her. And she's captivated and even perhaps smitten in love with Kei, who represents something that is not negative, is not something endangering her potentially, but is something that completely goes beyond just her sort of normal everyday function. Now, is that a mechanical function? Is she an android? Is she just a very strange and enclosed, young woman who's really just, this is really her first, steps into the grander world and interacting with other human beings and everything? It's very strange. I mean, if you told me she was an android who was programmed simply to respond to Kei and no one other than Kei, and she really doesn't understand human thoughts and emotions and feelings and all that kind of stuff, and the fact that he is sometimes impetuous, sometimes flying by the seat of his pants with his decision making and things of that nature. Well, why, the way she is captivated in him is the subject of this discussion with the witch. But they bring it back to the McGuffin. They don't say the McGuffin, but they're talking about the McGuffin. A little pebble, a little stone, capable of encapsulating all of those unique properties that make Kei who he is, that challenge Haruki and captivate Haruki. Could she love and be smitten with that stone if his mind was encased within it in a similar fashion? Is there any physicality to it? Is there any, physical attraction? Whatever like that. And it's more so not about attractiveness. It's not about that sort of base human sexual need and desire. It's about an intellectual desire. So that Haruki, this very, again, potentially android mentality, she pretty much cuts cleanly enough that if it were just his mind, that would be enough for her. If a pebble contained his mind, his persona, his thought processes, this would be enough for her to sustain. I don't believe that for a minute, unless she is really a robot. While there are probably people who do exist thusly in our world, we are mostly a very animalistic, sexually charged, species. And so that's always going to be in there somewhere, whether procreation, whether sexual desire, whether, the enticement of physicality or that similar enticement that comes intellectually from the mind and the conversations and the deep getting to know one another and, speculating and hypothesizing on all these different sort of grandiose things, things that this series thus far has really delved into. And I really don't know if it's just the pomp and circumstance of trying to make it out to be smarter than it is, talking about these philosophical dilemmas and these hypotheses and speculative sort of, diagrams, if you will, like the Swamp Man thing and whatever like that. I don't know if it's just to sound smarter than it is, or it's really part and parcel with where this is going, the dilemmas the characters are facing. We've seen that some of these dilemmas, while not being very straightforward in how they're described and discussed, have played into aspects, whether it be Marase, whether it be Sarah, whether it be the cat girl, whether it be, Tsushima, whether it be Kei and Haruki themselves and Sumire, certain of these different quandaries do seem to circulate around the events that are transpiring. So I thought it was very interesting how we're delving into, the witch is trying to delve into the psyche of Haruki, whether human or not, remains to be seen. But it still brings it back to what the McGuffin seemingly is. The McGuffin that is, at least as of current, within the ownership of Kei. He has it, and he doesn't know what the significance of it is. Again, he's on the phone, trying to parse the history of Sasano, the guy who met up with him at the start of the episode, and trying to find out about his history. That's where we find out that the McGuffin, for all intents and purposes, the rumored McGuffin, began 2 years ago. And we know that's when the whole situation, the series began with Sumire's death and everything like that. The resets, the very earliest resets, his being introduced to Haruki. And it's just because Sasano now, he approaches Kei and says, this girl with these red eyes had come to me just out of the blue without warning, air quotes, we'll use air quotes on all of that, and removed his ability to very much re-enter memories. Again, there are through lines that are very similar, that are very intriguing to me, where Kei's own ability is this memory recall. Even in spite of the reset, he can recall events that happened the first pass through of any given number of days. And here is a cat who has these photographs that he can, air quotes, enter. He can make real for himself for a limited amount of time. I think he said 10 minutes. These memories, make them vivid, interact. Now the question is it just internal to him? Is he in some way, shape, or form capable of manipulating time? Because there has been that overhanging question about Sumire's death in the first episodes of the series, of some outward hand that we have not as yet seen potentially manipulating things, because things were a little different through the second and third pass-throughs of those days that led to Sumire's death. She had come to Kei's apartment or whatever, and then on a subsequent repeat of those days, she hadn't come, and then she was dead, and then there was nothing they could do about it. So it just seemed like there's something outward that was manipulating things surrounding the resetting and Kei and Haruki working together and finding their way, and this subsequently stopped for those 2 years. We jumped ahead, where apparently for just the fact that Kei was so remorseful, he gave up all told using his ability until Tsushima would come along and say, hey, work with us. In school, we're going to create a special club, a special group where you're going to work, you and Haruki will work together, reset, help people, whatever like that. He was done with it for 2 years after Sumire's death because he could not undo that. But it did not seem to be something that happened as a result of what he was doing. It seemed to be outwardly affected. So here we are introduced to this old man who can re-enter moments from his past. But again, is it something he is doing just for himself? Or if he enters those moments, is he actually entering the past that he could potentially manipulate to affect some change? Now, this coincides with the witch who, by her own accord, can physically touch someone and see their futures. So you put those two abilities together, much in a similar fashion to how Kei and Haruki are working with the resets, and there could be some really devious deeds unfolding here. The witch senses future events. Sasano goes and uses his ability to go backward into these moments and make sure they don't happen. It's kind of a similar thing. But again, I have been of the belief that there will be something antithetical to the grand design. In other words, that there will be where Kei and Haruki are trying to perform positive effects, there must be some force, some divide of a person or people working toward the opposite end of the spectrum, you know, working toward doing nefarious things and suspect things and such like that. And so all of this stuff, I mean, most of this stuff, this episode, it can really conform down to sort of the nutshell. Okay, so Kei meets Susanoo. Susanoo wants the McGuffin because his ability was stolen from him. Whether you believe that or not, it could be just the grand design machinations where he's working in tandem with this red-eyed girl that apparently Kei knows, by the way, and I wrote her name down because I couldn't remember it, Oka Eri. She debuts looking all punker and, you know, and badass by the end of the episode, but she's a self-proclaimed villainess who is going to shut Kei down, just for the simple fact that she doesn't like him. She hates him. And so that even includes, you know, Haruki. She's going to stop Haruki's reset, according to what she's saying. And Kei's not having that. That's what brings about the reset by the end. And so, yeah, oh man, it's just so really intriguing. So the witch warned Kei away from Sakurada, but really the reverse psychology therein being prompting him and propelling him to go to Sakurada, which was where he was meant to be, per her design, because of the future forecasted by her and seen by her, working whether in tandem by force with Susanoo, who could, you know, recapture these moments from his past, whether for himself personally or actually manipulate the past remains to be seen. But coupling them together spells something potentially nefarious. And then, of course, entering the fray is Oka Eri, who, you know, I don't know if I believe that she just went to Susanoo and removed his ability just to be a villain. It's very possible she's working in tandem with Susanoo, and this is a grand design to manipulate Kei and Haruki to some ends, whether to steal their abilities, whether to quell their abilities, whether to you know, exploit their abilities towards some other grand design that they are now no longer capable of, to find out whether the McGuffin is actually genuinely a legitimate thing, that they can wield all powers with them, or, you know, whatever like that. I mean, it's mind-blowing. And God help you if you made any sense of my rambling, covering all of this stuff in this episode. Again, I jotted down notes because of all that crazy timey-wiminess. 4 years ago we start the episode. 2 years ago was when Sumire died and when the McGuffin rumor began. And 38 years ago was when the Bureau and the abilities began to you know, burgeon, and the witch was confined, and people like Susanoo were manipulating her and exploiting her ability, and whether or not that meant, you know, actually changing and manipulating the past per his own ability remains to be seen. But Kei and Haruki are caught in the middle of whatever the hell's going down, and I can't wait to find out when the other leg drops. It looks like the next episode is going to be Empire Strikes Back level. Ominous indeed, and I'm all kinds of excited to see where this goes. Love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of episode 6 of Sakurada Reset as well, if you can make any sense out of it whatsoever, if I helped or hindered you in the long run with this descriptive, long-winded video. And yeah, otherwise, I hope this video finds you well. I'll catch y'all later. Peace.